Welcome back to our channel. Even the other Beatles didn't like having her around. When Paul's best friend picked her over the band, he felt devalued. Finally, in 2023, he told the painful truth. The Beatles weren't the only ones she broke up. Paul's heart was broken in a way that no one could explain. Before Paul McCartney was born, on June 18, 1942, Germany was bombing Liverpool all the time, and families like his had to hide underground almost every night. Jim was Paul's father and worked in cotton sales. Mary was Paul's mother and a nurse at Walton Hospital, where Paul was born. They lived too close to the docks, which were always being attacked, which was unsafe. His father joked that Paul looked awful when he was born, like a piece of red meat with one eye open and crying all the time. Back then, when there were bombs and blackouts, Paul's view of the world was altered by that rough start. Paul had already learned how to fight when he was 5 years old. Apparently, he hit a kid with a metal bar and got in trouble in front of the whole school. Later, especially after passing the 11+ test and getting into the Liverpool Institute, he needed to be tough. It wasn't easier for him because he was successful. He was picked on because his mother was Catholic and his father was Protestant. He was picked on badly by the other boys, who mostly came from Protestant families. It felt like a battle every day at school, so Paul learned how to keep himself safe. He would later write songs about surviving and being strong that were based on his early struggles. In 1956, Paul was going through the worst thing. Breast cancer killed his mother on October 31st. There was only 47 of her. It shocked Paul, who was only 14, who was trying to believe it. It was a secret that she was sick, and after surgery, she died of a blood clot. Paul's very first thought was sad. He wanted to know what they would do without her cash. Mary had brought in most of the money. He made fun of her for the way she said the word ask as his last memory of her. That feeling of guilt never went away. After only a few months, he wrote his first song, I Lost My Little Girl, to help him deal with his grief. The pain of that loss would stay with him forever. Many years later, he dreamed that she told him everything would be okay. This dream led to the writing of one of his most famous songs, Let It Be. Jimmy, Paul's dad, was more than just a salesman. He could play the piano and trumpet very well. Working as a spotlight operator at Liverpool's Hippodrome Theatre, he learned music by listening to it every night. Jim gave Paul a trumpet in 1957 because he wanted him to become a musician like him. Paul quickly learned, though, that he couldn't sing and play the trumpet at the same time. He did that and got a $15 guitar in exchange. That simple choice changed the whole history of music. Paul could sing and write songs at the same time with the guitar. His dad loved old music, and Paul took a lot of inspiration from that, especially his love of strong melodies and catchy tunes. Irrespective of music and school, Paul still had to work. In 1958, when he was 16, he did hard jobs to help support his family. In the cold mornings, he delivered coal, and at a cotton mill, where the machines were so loud that you couldn't think, he swept the floors. Growing up, his grandfather cut tobacco at Cope's warehouse, and his dad worked at Liverpool's Cotton Exchange. Paul learned about working people from these events. How sad, proud, and funny they are. There are a lot of Beatles songs that honor everyday life that came from this world. In 1952, Paul was 10 years old when a scary event took place. It was almost too dangerous for him to swim with friends in one of Liverpool's flooded quarries. Although these deep holes looked like fun, they were actually very dangerous. They were traps for kids because they were full of freezing water and old mining equipment. It got too slippery for Paul, so his friends had to pull him out. The water had killed a lot of kids. He has never been able to swim again because of that scare. It may have also made him more aware of how fragile life is. After that, something big happened. As of July 6, 1957, Paul attended a church party at Woolton's St. Peter's. The weather was hot and sunny. He saw a boy named John Lennon play the guitar with some strange chords that his mother had taught him. Since Paul played guitar with his left hand, he turned John's guitar over and played 20 Flight Rock perfectly while singing every word. Furthermore, he was very good at singing Long Tall Sally. It was unbelievable to the band. He was good at singing, playing, and tuning guitars. He also knew all the song titles. They started working together right then, and it would change the world. Pete Shotton saw Paul riding his bike 2 weeks later and asked him to join John's band, the Quarrymen. After scout camp and a family vacation in Philadelphia, Paul said he would. The first real show he did with the group was on October 18, 1957. They paid off the jackets slowly, bit by bit. Everyone wore jackets that matched. It was even more sad because Julia, John's mother, had died only 3 months before. Paul knew what that pain was like. He lost his mother the previous year. Sharing a loss brought them closer, and their music carried the feelings they couldn't say out loud. John and Paul skipped school in 1959 to write songs in Paul's room at 20 4th Lynn Road. These two people sat on opposite sides, using a cheap tape recorder to write down and record ideas. Their first song together was called Too Bad About Sorrows. It then went on to play Just Fun and Looking Glass, an instrumental. Writing songs was like work for them, and they wrote over 100 songs in a notebook before they were famous. Their future success would depend on this. However, things did not go as planned. Paul's only job at that first Quarryman show in October 1957 was to play a boogie guitar solo. He had done it many times before, but his nerves got the best of him when it was time. He stood still and stumbled through the song. He was so embarrassed. He was almost done with music for good. He almost quit, but he ultimately chose that he wasn't suited to being a lead guitarist. He knew they needed a better singer after that failure, which is why George Harrison joined in early 1958. The band would never be the same after that change. During a crazy tour in Scotland in May 1960, Paul changed his name to a stage name. 8 days, the band played behind singer Johnny Gentle. To sound cool, Paul called himself Paul Ramon. They took a van that was very crowded. They stayed in sketchy places that weren't even on the posters. Even though the tour was a disaster, Paul remembered that girls from Scotland asked him if that was his real name. He learned what it's like to live on the road, even though it was a mess. Then Hamburg showed up. The Beatles first played at the Indra Club in Germany's red light district on August 17, 1960. Every night, they played for hours, for 0.5 hours during the week, and 6 hours on Saturdays. There were lots of illegal clubs and rough people there. There weren't even enough points for food for each of them. They got better when they grinded. People who owned clubs would yell at them to put on a show, which they did. John would do crazy things on stage, and they began to develop a real style of performance. As time went on, George said that Hamburg was where they really became a band. While they were in Hamburg, Paul made a very important choice. It was time for a new bassist when Stuart Sutcliffe quit the group in 1961. Paul didn't want the part, but he ended up taking it. He went to a nearby music store and bought a Hofner violin bass. It became famous for that bass. It's on the band's early albums and singles like She Loves You. People's ideas about the bass guitar changed because of the way he played it. No longer was it just background. It turned into a heartfelt part of the song. The moment they met Brian Epstein, everything changed. He saw them play at the Cavern Club on November 9, 1961, and knew right away that they were something special. He offered to run them just a few weeks later, on December 3rd. He didn't have any experience, but they liked his style and confidence. He was also liked by their parents. Soon, he was leading the group to something considerably bigger. In August 1962, there was the biggest scandal. Ringo Starr was asked to join the band by John. After only 2 days, Pete Best was out. Fans were really angry. There were protests outside of Pete's house, and one angry supporter even punched George. The producer did not trust Ringo at his first recording session. A session drummer instead. Ringo thought he might also be fired, but the new band worked well together and everything changed. They released their first single, Love Me Do, on October 5, 1962. The song didn't go straight to the top of the charts, but by November it had reached number 17 in the UK. John played harmonica, and Paul sang harmony and played bass. They made 3 records with 3 different drummers. The song eventually made it to the US in 1964 and quickly became a hit. It was their 4th number 1 hit in the US in the same year, which set a record and made them famous all over the world. For Young Men from Liverpool changed the world when they went on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9, 1964. 3 years later, 73 million people were glued to their screens, breaking the old record. A huge 50,000 people asked CBS for tickets, but the theater could only hold 728. The moment became more famous than Elvis's first show in 1957, when only 7,000 people asked to see him. While the camera moved across the band members during one song, John's caption said, "Sorry girls, he's married." Olympic skater Terry McDermott pretended to cut Paul's hair off backstage, making everyone laugh out loud. There was All My Loving at the beginning. After that, Paul sang Till There Was You and She Loves You. He then came back for I Saw Her Standing There and I Want to Hold Your Hand. Everything took place only 77 days after President Kennedy was killed. America started to smile again because of this happy noise. Then, in March 1964, something even stranger took place. When Can't Buy Me Love came out on the 16th, it went viral right away. Pre-orders for it had already topped 1.7 million in the US and over 2.1 million around the world. Over 1 million copies were sold in just one day. From April 4th to April 5th, the song went from number 27 to number 1. At the time, it was the biggest jump in Billboard history. Every single number 1 on the chart that day belonged to the Beatles. Twist and Shout came in at number 2. There were 14 of their songs on the Hot 100 the next week, including She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Please, Please Me. That level of control wouldn't be seen again until 2022, but not all times were happy. While traveling to Manila on July 4th, 1966, things started to get dark. People got angry because the Beatles didn't show up to an event at the palace that was being hosted by First Lady Imelda Marcos. The media changed the story when they didn't show up, even though they hadn't agreed to go. A lot of angry people lined the road as they went to the airport. The men in uniform beat them and their team. Even the escalators were shut down because the airport manager was bragging about punching Ringo and John and hitting their manager. People attacked even local fans who tried to keep them safe. Paul said that when they were finally safe, they kissed their seats. That rough day made them think that maybe touring wasn't worth it anymore. So then, Paul had an idea that would change music again on November 19, 1966, on the way home from a safari in Kenya. While he was sitting with his girlfriend Jane Asher and road manager Mal Evans, he thought of a made-up band that could help them stop being the Beatles. He didn't like how the mop top made him look and wanted something different. This is what his idea turned into: Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. In the end, John played it down by saying that Paul was just following trends, and George never really liked the idea. Still, the project changed what albums could be, though sometimes it didn't work. The BBC showed their black and white movie Magical Mystery Tour on December 26, 1967. Shot mostly on an old airfield in Kent, it happened not long after the sudden death of manager Brian Epstein. These people were ready to attack, and they did. There wasn't enough color or sound, and the story seemed like it was all over the place. It was their first disappointing performance. The show aired in color in January 1968, but it didn't make a big difference. Funny enough, the movie was later seen as a brave example of experimental filmmaking. It still did well with sales of the soundtrack. At about the same time, a strange rumor began to spread. A real moped accident happened to Paul in London in 1966. This small event set off the idea that Paul is dead in some way. Fans thought he had died in a car accident on November 9, 1966, and that a look-alike had been secretly put in his place. People said that songs and album covers had clues in them. In 1969, the idea was popular on college campuses and in newspapers across the United States. Life magazine finally put out pictures of Paul in November 1969, showing that he was still alive and happy. Behind the scenes, things were going wrong that same year. There was a lot of stress during the 1968 sessions for the White Album. Paul tried to stay in charge while John accepted chaos. Yoko Ono had a big impact on her. On many occasions, Paul taught the others how to play, and other times, he just recorded their parts. George was angry because he felt like he was just playing in the background of his own band. John was happy to see Yoko, even though he knew it made Paul mad. He was in charge of a band that didn't want to follow by the end of that year. Finally, in January 1969, Paul made one last attempt to bring them back together. During the Get Back project, he came up with the idea of recording live songs instead of using studio tricks. The sessions were supposed to save the group, but instead they showed how far they had fallen. George quit the band on January 10th and never came back. The others were no longer interested, but Paul kept pushing. There were cameras there the whole time. We were supposed to celebrate, but what happened was a sad documentary called Let It Be came out. April 9th, 1970, was the last blow. Paul quietly told everyone that he had no plans to work with the Beatles again in a press release for his solo album McCartney. And when asked if there would be a new Beatles album, he said, no. When asked if the break would last, he said, time will tell. The next day, his bandmates read about it in the news. It happened at a terrible time, right before Let It Be came out, and fans were crushed. What happened next wasn't the end. Back in 1970, Paul sued his best friends in London's High Court. He wanted a legal way to break up the Beatles and stop Alan Klein from managing their money. On January 19, 1971, the court case began. The other three Beatles defended their choice, while Paul said Klein's management was careless. Finally, on March 12, 1971, the judge agreed with Paul and said that Klein had been careless. Afterward, Paul said that was the only way to keep their music safe. It didn't get easier. How Do You Sleep, a harsh song by John Lennon that attacked Paul personally, came out in September 1971. In addition to making fun of Paul's work and calling him washed up, he also got George to play guitar. John was mad because he thought Paul's earlier songs had hidden jabs at him. It got so bad that people wrote mean letters to the public, and Klein is said to have added insults. The friendship ended. Paul kept moving at the same time. He quietly freed McCartney on April 17, 1970. His first record by himself. He played all the instruments and sang all the lines while recording it by himself at home. Some reviewers didn't like the rough sound or unfinished tracks, but fans didn't mind. It was the #1 song in the US and the #2 song in the UK. A bunch of new musicians started out with that low-fidelity album. It was 1971 when Paul did something else risky. His band Wings was made up of Linda, Denny Laine on guitar, and Denny Seiwell on drums. Wildlife, their first album, came out in December 1971 and did not do well at all. People didn't like it, and a lot of them thought Paul had lost his magic. Fans were not sure about Linda because she had never been a professional musician. However, this failure made a big thing possible. They went to Lagos, Nigeria, in 1973 to record Band on the Run, but horrible things happened. 2 people from the band quit before the flight. The studio was quite bad. Knuckle Point was broken into, and the McCartneys lost their lyrics and tapes. All of that being said, Paul kept going. The album was his biggest hit after the Beatles, and he played most of the instruments himself. It sold 3 million copies, was #1 in the US for 4 weeks, and also won the top spot in the UK and Australia. The Wings got even bigger in 1976. They played shows all over the US from May 3rd to June 23rd and had over 600,000 fans. Paul played their old songs live for the first time since the Beatles broke up. The band traveled in style, while their fans screamed with happiness. Ringo even gave Paul flowers on stage as a surprise. A live album from the tour showed that Wings had grown into a serious force. Problems were close by, though. Something terrible happened to Paul on January 16, 1980. He brought about 8 ounces of marijuana with him on the plane to Japan. He wasn't shy about it. A small prison cell held him for 9 days, and a 7-year sentence was almost assured. Wings lost over $1 million because their whole tour in Japan had to be canceled. George Harrison was the only one who responded. It broke Wings to be arrested. Additionally, the band broke up in April 1981. Paul was going through a different kind of love story behind the scenes. May 15, 1967, was the day he met Linda Eastman. It was right around the time that the Beatles broke up that they got married on March 12, 1969. As a couple, they had kids, went on tours, and were rarely apart for more than a few days at a time. In April 1998, Linda died of breast cancer, the same sickness that killed Paul's mother in 1956. For almost a year, he cried and said, "I lost my girlfriend." Paul attempted to move on after Linda's death. He got married to Heather Mills in 2002, but they split up quickly. Their daughter, Beatrice, was born in 2003, but by 2006, they were no longer together. The fight over the divorce got nasty when Heather asked for $250 million. The court gave her $24.3 million in 2008 and said she was unstable and dishonest. She lost it after the verdict, and that was the end of the fairy tale. Like many musicians, Paul McCartney has only dreamed of living such a perfect life. In spite of his fame and music, there have been times when even his biggest fans were shocked. Paul put out a movie called Give My Regards to Broad Street in 1984. He wrote, produced, and starred in it himself, so it was supposed to be his big Hollywood moment. It was supposed to be something personal and artistic. The movie, on the other hand, did so badly at the box office that it became one of the biggest duds in movie history. The movie got a little over $1 million in ticket sales, even though it cost $9 million to make. The first weekend brought in just over $500,000. The people didn't just ignore it. They not liked it. It was panned by critics who said his acting was stiff and dull, and people never saw it again. The soundtrack did well in the UK. It even got to #1, but it wasn't enough to fix the movie's bad name. That setback killed Paul's chances of becoming famous in movies. Later, in 2001, something happened that caught everyone by surprise. John Lennon. He hit a photographer outside a London theater, making headlines all of a sudden. He was thought to be the nicest and calmest Beatle. It wasn't a rumor from a tabloid. There were actual charges of assault brought. He had already done something similar before. He punched a Life magazine photographer in Scotland in 1969. In 2001, the charges were dropped, but fans were shocked because they had always thought of Paul as a nice person. He kept smiling in public, but it was clear there were cracks behind the scenes. It happened during a stressful time in his life. Paul did a lot that same year to help America get better after the September 11th attacks. The concert for New York City, with David Bowie, Bon Jovi, and The Who, took place on October 20th, 2001, with his help. To help the victims and their families, we need to raise $35 million. Even so, Paul said something that shocked people during this sad time. He admitted that he used cocaine while the Beatles were recording in the 1960s. People who liked him were used to him denying or playing down drug use. A lot of people felt bad hearing this from him while he was supposed to be comforting people after a national tragedy. He saw the Twin Towers on fire from his plane on September 11th, but he got stuck in New York for a week. He wrote and sang the live song Freedom in response. Unfortunately, the timing of his drug confession made it seem out of place and hurt people's view of him as a trustworthy leader during a crisis. Things in his personal life got worse by 2003. Heather Mills, who was married to him at the time, said he did something really shocking. She told him he hit her with red wine and then stabbed her in the arm with the broken portion of the glass. The woman said he hit her several times, including one time when he pushed her over a table and another time when she was 4 weeks pregnant. She also said he choked her when she asked about marijuana. This was all revealed during their tense divorce case, including insults, legal threats, and upsetting claims. Heather even said Paul tried to tell her when she could and couldn't breastfeed their daughter Beatrice. Even though his team denied all of the claims, they were all over the news. Everyone was confused. In 2012, Paul married Nancy Sheffield. It should have been a wonderful start to their new life together, but it wasn't. Many rumors spread. Nancy before Paul even broke up with Heather. Heather said that she had talked to him about it in 2006. People kept talking about Paul even though he denied it. They'd known each other for a long time. She and her husband were even friends with Paul and Linda, who died recently. Paul and Nancy were seen having drinks and dinner at a high-end resort, which made things look fishy, then meeting her at a hotel in London soon after Heather had a court date. Adding to the drama, Nancy's family was said to have ties to the mafia through their trucking business. In 1988, her dad was said to have had bad ties with a known mob killer. For these reasons, it was hard for people to celebrate Paul's new marriage without looking at him funny or making assumptions. Paul has also kept strong emotions for the people who made a huge difference in his life. They included Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon in 1980. Chapman is known for killing John Lennon, but many people don't know that he also thought about killing Paul. He knew who to shoot. Chapman didn't just kill John, Paul said. He also took away any chance Paul had to make peace with him after years of creative disagreements. Their differences happened in the 1970s, and Paul never got to say goodbye. John's death meant that Paul had to live in his shadow, always being compared to a man who was now seen as a martyr. He once said it was like arguing with a ghost. When he and Heather split up in 2008, it was a big deal for everyone. In the end, she got a £55 million settlement, which included £20 million in cash and payments every year until their daughter turned 18. The judge said Heather was even out of control. In British newspapers, she was made to look like a bad person. When compared to Paul's calm marriage to Linda that lasted decades, everything seemed quite chaotic. Heather called him names, yelled at the media, and made up crazy claims in public. Afterward, she said that reporters had hacked her phone and listened in on Paul's voicemails while they were fighting. But because of a court order, she can't talk about many of the details in public. It's been even worse between him and Yoko Ono. In 1968, she started showing up at recording sessions with the Beatles, which messed up everything. The Beatles' producer, George Martin, and they had always worked alone. They didn't like having other people in their space. Later, Paul said that they didn't want her there because it had always been a thing between men. He said it made them grumble quietly. Their instruments and movement around the studio made Yoko feel strange. John was moving toward Yoko, and Paul felt like he was being pushed to the side. Even after John died, things were still tense. In a podcast from 2023, Paul said it was never easy and that no one in the band liked how she got in the way. Michael Jackson paid $47.5 million for the rights to all of the Beatles' songs in 1985, which was another painful event. Most painful for Paul was teaching Michael how important music rights were. They had worked together on songs like The Girl Is Mine and Say, Say, Say. Paul also told him how to make money by investing in publishing. Michael even said, "One day I'll own your songs, haha." Then he did that very thing. He was too poor for Paul to bid more. It was said that Yoko Ono was surprised when Jackson asked for the rights instead of a corporation. At that point, they were no longer friends. And before Michael died in 2009, neither man forgave the other. Although not all of Paul's surprises were bad. He finally put out the music session One Hand Clapping in June 2024. It had been hidden away for 50 years. Wings recorded it live at Abbey Road Studios in August 1974, right after Band on the Run became a big hit. The plan was for it to be both a documentary and an album. It was never made public until now. Paul singing 20 Flight Rock, the same song he played for John Lennon the day they met in 1957, is one of the most powerful parts of the recording. There are even rare recordings made in the backyard of Abbey Road and songs that haven't been released yet that fans had only heard about. At 82 years old, Paul opened a time capsule and let everyone see himself when he was younger, directly from the heart of his best. That wasn't the only career high point near the end. Paul's album Egypt Station came out in 2018 when he was 76 years old and went straight to #1 on the Billboard 200. His album went straight to #1 in the US for the first time in his entire solo career. It also broke the record for the oldest artist to do so. His last #1 album in the US was Tug of War in 1982. Over 150,000 copies of the album were sold in its first week. He promoted it by singing in a carpool video that went viral, and he even put on a surprise show at Grand Central Station. There were not many rock stars Paul's age left, but he was still topping the charts and selling out stadiums. He did not have an easy time becoming a royal, though. The Queen finally knighted him on March 11, 1997. It should have happened a lot sooner, but it took 17 years because he was arrested for drugs. He was caught with marijuana in Tokyo in January 1980 and went to jail for 9 days. Another time was when he went to Buckingham Palace in 1965 to receive an MBE medal. In the palace bathroom, the Beatles smoked pot behind closed doors. Paul said something soft and emotional when he finally got down on one knee in front of the Queen. "I see. I remember the other three," he said. "I keep looking back to see if they're there." His wife Linda was sick with cancer and couldn't make it. After only 13 months, she died.